One of the most controversial ideas that's been formed on the stories of the Bible is the serpent seed theory, or the two-seed line theory, that appears to have stemmed from early Gnostic writings, most notably the Gospel of Philip, which was written sometime in the 3rd century. This rather sinister theory essentially provides an alternative idea for the fall of man, and while it has quite limited evidence to support it, in my opinion, it's quite a compelling and downright interesting idea to ponder upon. Now, before we start, let me just put out a disclaimer that this isn't a theory that I necessarily subscribe to. It is merely an idea proposed by the Gnostic texts, authors of various midrashes, and various American religious leaders, most notably the evangelist William M. Branham. For the most part, the idea has been rejected by many mainstream Christian theologians, and doesn't hold much weight once you pick it apart. But let's dive into it for ourselves, shall we? So the serpent seed idea, which I'm sure you've guessed from the title, is the idea that Cain is the son of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and not of Adam as conventionally believed. Of course, this paints Eve as having been unfaithful to Adam, and that somewhere during her time in the Garden of Eden, she was seduced by the serpent, and carried his son, a boy who would become Cain. Whether Adam was aware of her infidelity or not is unknown, but some Midrash writers believed him to be ignorant of the fact, given that he goes on to raise Cain just as he raised Abel, without ever seeming to treat him any differently, nor show any indifference towards Eve thereafter. Where most Midrashes seek to justify this theory is by the difference in behaviour and attitude between Cain and Abel. We will notice that where Abel is selfless, in that he wishes to sacrifice something important to God, Cain is far more frugal, and seeks only to sacrifice that which he doesn't need anymore. The Bible tells us, "Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions, from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favour on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favour. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast." Of course, anyone reading the Bible would understand that the difference in how God treats them is in correlation to how worthy their sacrifice is. Where Abel gave God something important to him, that being the firstborn of his flock and the associated fat portions, Cain gives him fruits of the soil, and there is an implication here that Cain's sacrifice was on the stingy side by comparison. It becomes apparent that God favours Abel, but seems to kind of shun Cain. The serpent seed theory, however, attempts to justify Cain being the son of the serpent by suggesting that God didn't give Cain the same appreciation, not because he was disappointed in his sacrifice, but because he hated Cain, because Cain was the product of the serpent, his mortal enemy, Satan. Naturally, God knows all that has taken place, and so he would therefore have been aware of Eve's affair. Furthermore, he would also be aware that once more, Satan has been able to corrupt something he loved. We know this is Satan's ultimate objective after all, in that everything he does is to corrupt man, because he knows this is probably one of the only ways that he is able to hurt God. Naturally, Satan hates man, and so he would do anything in his power to bring them down. But by seducing Eve, he not only gets to spite her and Adam, but he is also able to leave a permanent mark upon the world by using his offspring to spread his sin. Another idea here, though again completely unsubstantiated, is that God didn't evict Adam and Eve because they were tempted by the serpent, but because Eve had lain with the serpent. I believe this is attached because it further reinforces an early Christian idea that women are the root of all evil, and that women are responsible for the downfall of men. There is also the idea that whilst God was aware of Eve's infidelity and the illegitimacy of Cain, God shows Cain mercy, for he proceeds to tell him in the Bible, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So despite his parentage, and despite being the son of the serpent, God still gives Cain the benefit of the doubt. He still tries to make him into a better man, and still tries to show him the right path, instead of just casting him out from the get-go, or worse, killing him. He seeks to show Cain the righteous path, and gives him guidance in a most nurturing way, perhaps far more than he deserved, given his darker intentions. We see these same dark intentions manifest when Cain kills Abel and performs the very first murder. Some Midrash and early Gnostic writings attempt to pin this murder on the inherent evilness of Cain, and not because he was merely jealous of his brother. No, in this theory, Cain kills Abel because it is quite literally in his blood. He is the son of the devil, and so naturally, he would have evil in him, which makes him more inclined to violence. We then see Cain proceed to lie to God when asked where Abel is. The line, "Am I my brother's keeper?" suddenly takes on a whole new meaning, for Cain's evil streak is well and truly awakened. Cain seeks to try and deceive God, and whilst this may likely be his naivety, in that he thinks he can lie to the Lord, or maybe attempt to hide his guilty actions, it does sound like something Satan would try to do. The fact that Cain even tries to lie to God shows that he actually cannot stop sinning now that he started. Furthermore, he doesn't actually show any remorse here for killing his brother, and seems far more concerned with the punishment he endures, which is to wander the land as a restless soul. The Bible tells us in reference to this, "The Lord said, 'What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth.'" The fact that Cain shows little regard for murdering his brother and seems far more concerned with himself is most certainly a wicked and undesirable personality trait. But is this enough to suggest that this makes him the son of Satan? Believers in this serpent seed theory would argue that the only other men in existence at the time, that being Adam and Abel, did not demonstrate this same wickedness, and so Cain couldn't have been related to them because he is worlds apart in his thinking and his behaviour. Beyond this, there isn't much to support this theory, using this argument alone. Sure, Cain is nothing like Adam and Abel, given that he's capable of murder, but we do not see Adam and Abel tested in the same way, so who knows whether they would have acted similarly had they been snubbed by God. The most notable believer of this theory was the evangelist William Branham, who took this whole thing a step further and believed that because Eve had lain with the serpent, this put every other woman born after Eve in a permanent state of sin, for they too carried the seed of the devil. To him and others who believe this theory, Eve is the representation of all women, and because the very first woman happened to be the very first woman to cheat on her spouse, all women were inclined to do the same. He also believed that there were two separate progenies in the world, those that were the righteous descendants of Adam, and those who were the evil descendants of Cain. Those that were descended from Adam were of course God-fearing, and sought to do good in the world. Those that were descended from Cain were of course wicked, though not because they were more inclined to murder, or cheat, or do any kinds of wicked things like that. No, according to Branham, they were also more inclined to study science, and educate themselves beyond the constraints of religion. Indeed, it seems Branham saw education itself as a sin, because it was something of a trap used by Satan to obscure the teachings in the Bible and the Word of God. To him, education and women were the two biggest factors that could lead a man into corruption, although this isn't the least of his unorthodox ideas. He also believed that the serpent, having slept with Eve, was the missing link between chimpanzee and man. Another idea by various supporters of the serpent seed theory is that the Jews were the descendants of Adam and Seth, but the Kenites, a nomadic tribe in ancient Israel, were the descendants of Cain. Beyond this, there is not much to support this theory. Various midrashes have tried to detail the event itself, whereby it's been told that the serpent lured Eve away from Adam whilst he was sleeping and had his way with her. Other interpretations believe that Adam was privy to the event and was unable to stop Eve from wandering into the serpent's coils. Others believe that Eve was tricked, or perhaps didn't even consent to the seduction of the serpent. But for the most part, the most prevalent theory here is that Eve willingly lay with the serpent and begot child. In the King James Version of the Bible, Genesis 3:15 shows us the punishment that God gives the serpent after he learns that Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed." Here, God is likely referring to their offspring when he speaks of seed, and states there will always be hostility between man and serpent. But it is here where the theory in question gets its namesake as the two-seed theory, where believers see seeds in this case as literal, as in the seed within Satan and his seed which now lay within Eve. Of course, the most insidious thing about this whole theory is that half of us living in the world are literally descendants of Satan. Whilst again this isn't exactly sound logic, it might be the only thing from this theory that would make a tad bit of sense. The whole theory though brings on some problematic questions and theological paradoxes. If this is true, then that would imply that demons are able to mate with humans too, and produce offspring. If not, and Satan is the only one who has this ability, then what are the chances of him doing it again? Think about it. If he was able to do it right under the nose of God in his very own garden, are we expected to believe that he'd never bother to do it again on Earth, where he had far easier access and perhaps far less consequence? If this theory is to be believed, then Satan has probably been sleeping with women for thousands of years and filling up the world with his accursed spawn. To many believers, the fall of man is pretty black and white. The fall is about disobedience to God, and not because Eve had a cheeky fling. I'm pretty sure the authors of the Bible would have been keen to explicitly mention this if that was the case. Furthermore, the general consensus is that Cain was just immature in not being able to handle his emotions, and not inherently evil because he was the bastard child of Eve and Satan. And personally, I believe that the longer you stare at something, the more likely you are to derive an alternative idea, something that might not have been the original author's intention.